The night of July 17, 1918, in a cellar in Yekaterinburg, saw the violent execution of Tsar Nicholas II, his immediate family, and their closest retainers, a moment designed by the Bolsheviks to erase the Romanov dynasty from history forever. Yet, behind the headline tragedy lies a much broader overlooked story. Dozens of extended family members, distant cousins, and peripheral princes managed to flee the engulfing civil war through perilous routes across Crimea and Europe. The abandoned imperial palaces, staggering estates, and centuries of unbridled authority, escaping with little more than hand luggage and their family names. From that moment, the descendants of one of the world's most absolute monarchies faced a radical reality shift: how to survive in a rapidly modernizing world that no longer recognized their divine right to rule. Rather than fading into historical obscurity or surviving purely on disappearing inheritances, the living heirs of the Romanov dynasty adapted to the 20th and 21st centuries in ways that challenge our typical assumptions about royal exile. Across Europe and the Americas, modern Romanovs have transformed an imperial legacy into diverse individual livelihoods. Today, you will not find them ruling from gilded thrones, but working inside corporate offices, designing fine jewelry for international luxury brands, painting in fine art studios, directing films, and even managing nonprofit foundations. Their collective journey represents a fascinating case study in socioeconomic adaptation, demonstrating how social class, historical branding, and personal merit intersect when a ruling family is forced into the private market. This investigation moves beyond simple nostalgia to examine the concrete mechanics of how the Romanov descendants built their lives after the fall of the empire. We will analyze the strategies used by different branches of the family to monetize their heritage, navigate political exile during the Cold War, and build legitimate professional careers in the contemporary global economy. From high-fashion runways in Italy and watchmaking workshops linked to Peter the Great, to secret stunt performers surviving under Soviet rule, this is the story of how the heirs to an empire learned to work for a living. In April 1919, amid the advancing Red Army, the British battleship HMS Marlborough weighed anchor off the coast of Yalta, Crimea. Sent by King George V to rescue his aunt, the Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna, mother of the executed Tsar Nicholas II. The warship carried away dozens of Romanov family members and Russian aristocrats. For those standing on the deck watching the Crimean coastline recede, the moment marked not just an escape from physical danger, but the permanent collapse of their world. They left behind millions of hectares of land, palatial residences, and institutional power, entering an uncertain exile with only what could fit in their travel trunks. The initial refuge offered by Britain provided safety, but it quickly exposed the stark financial vulnerability of the exiled dynasty. While Empress Maria Feodorovna was granted an annual allowance funded jointly by King George V and Queen Alexandra, the broader family had no such safety net. Royal relatives who had spent their lives managing vast imperial estates found themselves navigating foreign bureaucracies, rental agreements, and living costs in post-WWI London. The sudden loss of domestic revenues from Russia meant that liquid capital, mostly jewels brought in hand luggage, was their only immediate means of sustenance. London's financial elite and auction houses soon became the battleground for Romanov survival. Romanov women, including Grand Duchess Xenia Alexandrovna, were forced to gradually liquidate priceless imperial jewelry, heirlooms, and artwork to pay for daily expenses, medical care, and housing. However, the market was flooded with Russian refugee valuables, drastically depressing their selling prices. What were once symbols of imperial majesty and divine right were reduced to mere commodities, traded at discount rates to satisfy pressing debts and living expenses. As Western governments formally recognized the Soviet Union throughout the 1920s, any lingering hopes of recovering frozen imperial state assets or foreign bank accounts vanished. Legal battles over Romanov funds deposited in British and French banks were bogged down by jurisdictional disputes, competing claims among surviving relatives, and the refusal of foreign states to disperse funds without clear sovereign authority. The realization set in: the wealth that remained was finite, and the prestige of their surname would not pay the bills indefinitely. By the mid-1920s, Paris emerged as the primary hub for the Russian émigré community, drawing hundreds of Romanov relatives and former nobles. Unlike London, where a small circle of royals maintained close ties to the British court, Paris offered a dynamic yet unforgiving economic environment. The French capital was filled with displaced aristocrats forced to enter the urban labor force, fundamentally altering the social hierarchy of the old regime. Princes and counts were suddenly working as taxi drivers, translators, seamstresses, and floor managers in Parisian department stores. For the younger generation of Romanovs in Paris, the financial shock acted as a catalyst for professional adaptation. Recognizing that traditional aristocratic patronage was dead, figures like Prince Dmitry Alexandrovich worked as factory hands and stockbrokers, while Prince Vasily Alexandrovich took on manual labor jobs in the United States, before transitioning into agriculture and shipyard work. The romanticized image of royalty gave way to the gritty reality of 12-hour workdays, where survival depended entirely on personal adaptability rather than lineage. French fashion houses and luxury ateliers became unexpected havens for exiled Romanov women, who leveraged their refined taste and cultural education to secure employment. Grand Duchess Marie Pavlovna founded Kitmir, an embroidery workshop in Paris that created intricate designs for Coco Chanel and major French fashion houses. This was not a hobby, but a commercial enterprise employing dozens of Russian refugees, proving that the family's artistic capital could be successfully monetized in the competitive Western market. Ultimately, the evacuation aboard HMS Marlborough and the subsequent financial trial in London and Paris redefined the Romanov dynasty for the modern era. The transition from absolute power to economic self-reliance was painful and marked by loss, but it laid the groundwork for future generations. By stripping away their inherited wealth, the early years of exile forced the Romanovs to integrate into the global working economy, a transformation that continues to shape how their descendants live and work today. Prince Rostislav Rostislavovich Romanov, born in Chicago in 1985 and raised in the United Kingdom, represents a distinct generation of the Imperial family, one born decades after the initial flight into exile, yet deeply shaped by its psychological inheritance. As a professional landscape artist and fine art painter, Rostislav chose a medium that allowed him to explore his identity away from political claims. Through his brushwork, he treats painting not merely as a career, but as an intimate space to process what it means to belong to a dynasty stripped of its homeland. Rostislav's artistic training at the Falmouth University of Art in Cornwall grounded him in traditional landscape painting and impressionistic techniques. Instead of painting grand portraits of historic ancestors or idealized imperial monuments, he turned his focus to the natural world, capturing light, movement, and mood. This choice is key to understanding his work. By focusing on raw landscapes, Rostislav strips away the heavy ornamentation of imperial history, leaving behind a pure emotional connection to space and nature. A central theme running through Rostislav's portfolio is the palpable tension between physical location and inherited memory. Having grown up in Western Europe, his early landscapes depicted the rugged coastal cliffs of Cornwall and the quiet British countryside. Yet these works often convey a sense of solitude and distance, reflecting the displaced perspective of a family raised on stories of a distant motherland they could not inhabit. The quiet, almost haunting atmosphere of his color palettes speaks to a quiet longing for a lost geographical anchor. When Rostislav eventually traveled to Russia as an adult, the experience transformed his artistic expression. Painting in plein air in the Russian countryside and around historic sites in St. Petersburg allowed him to engage directly with the soil of his ancestors. His Russian landscapes capture the stark light, birch forests, and expansive skies of the region, translating an inherited mental image into a physical, painted reality. This period marked a powerful shift from imagined nostalgia to direct visual engagement. The tension of exile manifests in his style through a dynamic interplay between structure and fluid abstraction. Rostislav frequently uses thick palette knife applications and loose, expressive brushstrokes that give his landscapes a transient, impermanent quality. Objects and horizons seem to shift and dissolve under light, echoing the fragility of memory and how historical identity is continually reshaped across generations. Nothing in his compositions is static. Everything feels as though it is in motion or fading into the background. Unlike historical court painters who documented royal power through rigid symmetry and permanent stone architecture, Rostislav paints elements that are inherently fleeting: clouds, changing water, shifting shadows, and season transitions. This stylistic choice carries a deep symbolic weight. It acknowledges that while physical empires, palaces, and titles crumble over time, the emotional essence of heritage survives through fluid, evolving forms of personal expression. Rostislav's work also serves as an important bridge between his family's past and the contemporary international art market. By exhibiting his paintings in galleries across London, Monaco, and St. Petersburg, he has established a respected reputation based on artistic merit rather than novel ancestral curiosity. His success as a fine artist demonstrates how the modern Romanovs navigate their legacy, by taking the intangible weight of exile and memory and converting it into creative, self-sustaining work that resonates with modern art collectors globally. The intersection of intellectual property law and historical royalty presents a fascinating legal battleground. Who truly owns a royal surname, crest, or monarchical title once an empire falls? In modern commercial branding, royal names carry immense intangible value, evoking centuries of prestige, luxury, and heritage. However, converting a historic royal identity into a legally protected corporate trademark requires navigating strict intellectual property frameworks, statutory restrictions on misleading consumers, and broader cultural claims over public history. Under international intellectual property regulations, legal ownership of a royal name or symbol rests heavily on registered trademark protections and commercial usage. While reigning monarchies often enjoy statutory protections, such as the UK's Trademarks Act, which explicitly limits unauthorized commercial usage, implying royal endorsement or patronage, fallen dynasties operate under standard commercial trademark laws. For descendants of non-reigning houses like the Romanovs, simply possessing royal blood does not automatically grant exclusive commercial rights to the surname. To establish legal ownership in global markets, individual heirs or family associations must register specific trademarks across defined commercial classes, such as luxury goods, apparel, or hospitality. A critical legal hurdle in corporate branding involves the doctrine of misrepresentation and the risk of misleading the public. Trademark registries routinely reject applications if a corporate brand attempts to use terms like royal, imperial, or specific monarchical insignias in a way that creates a false impression of official state backing or historical authenticity. When commercial entities adopt former royal names without direct genealogical ties, courts evaluate whether the usage constitutes unfair competition or consumer deception. Consequently, authentic descendants hold a distinct legal advantage. They can establish legitimate personal connection and heritage, avoiding bad faith, trademark claims that third-party corporations often face. Beyond statutory law lies the concept of cultural ownership, the ongoing debate over whether an imperial name belongs to a living family or to the collective historical heritage of a nation. When private luxury brands leverage imperial names, such as Romanov, Fabergé, or Bourbon, public sentiment and state authorities frequently argue that these historical names constitute public domain assets. In former imperial territories like Russia, state museums, cultural institutions, and public history advocates often challenge private corporate monopolies over historical branding, asserting that iconic imperial heritage should remain accessible to the public rather than locked behind exclusive private trademark registrations. For living descendants navigating the private sector, corporate branding requires balancing commercial utility with historical stewardship. Legal strategy dictates that family members monetize their names through authorized collaborations, licensing agreements, or luxury partnerships, such as Nicoletta Romanov's jewelry collection with Damiani, where their personal involvement lends genuine authenticity. By establishing legal entity structures, foundations, and registered commercial marks, modern royal heirs successfully defend their brand equity against unauthorized third-party exploitation while retaining commercial control over their family's identity. Furthermore, modern corporate trademark law enforces a strict use it or lose it requirement. Even if a royal family claims a historic crest or surname, intellectual property offices in most jurisdictions require active, continuous commercial use to maintain trademark protection. A non-reigning royal family cannot simply hoard historical symbols in perpetuity without bringing products or services to market. This legal reality creates a strong economic incentive for descendants to actively engage in commercial ventures, corporate ambassadorships, and design partnerships to preserve their exclusive legal rights over their inherited names. Ultimately, the legal and cultural ownership of royal names and corporate branding reflects a broader shift from feudal privilege to capitalist intellectual property management. In the modern economy, a royal crown no longer confers divine authority or automatic property rights. Instead, it functions as a highly valuable, heavily scrutinized brand asset. Whether through court battles over trademark registrations or strategic commercial partnerships, modern descendants must continually assert both their legal claims and cultural legitimacy to ensure their historic surnames remain protected in the global marketplace. Established in 1979 and registered in Switzerland, the Romanov Family Association, RFA, was founded by surviving members of the Dynasty to unite a geographically dispersed family while protecting their historical name from imposters. Led today by figures like Princess Olga Andreevna and Prince Rostislav Rostislavovich, the association deliberately bypassed complex political rivalries. Its core bylaws explicitly state that all dynastic questions and potential claims to government belong strictly to the Russian people. By removing political agendas from its mission, the RFA successfully rebranded the imperial family into a neutral civic organization focused on cultural heritage, historical education, and international philanthropy. The primary mechanism for the RFA's humanitarian work came with the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, leading to the creation of the Romanov Fund for Russia. This charity allowed dispersed family members across Western Europe and North America to mobilize private capital and direct it toward pressing social needs in their historical homeland. Acting as an independent non-governmental organization, the fund channeled Western donations directly into Russian orphanages, pediatric hospitals, elderly care homes, and cultural restoration projects. This initiative demonstrated how an exiled royal family could re-enter their native country not as political pretenders, but as altruistic social partners. Beyond direct financial relief, The association operates as a vital cultural bridge, facilitating the repatriation of historical artifacts, archives, and royal heirlooms back to Russian museums. During decades of exile, countless private letters, photographs, and imperial possessions remained scattered across private Western collections. By organizing international exhibitions, academic conferences, and donations to institutions like the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, the RFA helped reconnect modern Russian society with its pre-revolutionary historical narrative, a past that Soviet authorities had spent decades trying to suppress. This cultural diplomacy culminated in several high-profile state-sanctioned events that required intricate coordination between Western governments, the Russian state, and the Romanov family. The most prominent was the 1998 ceremonial reburial of Tsar Nicholas II and his family in the Peter and Paul Cathedral, followed by the 2006 translation of the remains of Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna from Denmark to St. Petersburg. On these occasions, the RFA acted as the official diplomatic liaison for dozens of foreign-born descendants, ensuring that solemn historical reconciliation took precedence over political posturing. The leadership of the RFA relies on a decentralized professional structure where individual members contribute expertise gained from their careers in Western business, law, art, and public relations. Rather than functioning as a traditional royal court, the association operates like an international board of trustees. Annual general assemblies allow members residing in the UK, France, Italy, and the United States to align on charitable priorities, review educational grants, and coordinate joint public statements regarding family heritage. This philanthropic framework allows the Romanovs to practice a unique form of modern, soft power. Without sovereign territory or state backing, their influence relies entirely on credibility, historical prestige, and international networking. By partnering with established European charities, international relief organizations, and cultural foundations, the RFA leverages the global recognition of its surname to attract corporate sponsorships and private donors who wish to support educational and medical causes in Eastern Europe. Ultimately, the Romanov Family Association exemplifies how a fallen royal house can reinvent its purpose in a globalized world. By transforming from an exiled elite into an active humanitarian bridge, the organization proved that the true legacy of a historic dynasty does not depend on restored crowns or political power. Instead, it rests on the family's ability to serve as a constructive link between different cultures, using their shared past to build meaningful modern philanthropic initiatives. During the Cold War, the Soviet state maintained a complex, deeply paranoid perception of surviving aristocratic descendants who remained within USSR borders. Under the ideological doctrine of Marxism-Leninism, former nobles, princes, and czarist officials were officially classified as former people, bivshie lyudi, a socio-political category that framed them as inherent class enemies, potential traitors, and permanent security risks. Rather than viewing them as harmless remnants of a bygone era, the Soviet security apparatus saw these individuals as potential anchors for counter-revolutionary activity or Western intelligence operations. Throughout the Stalinist era, particularly during the Great Purge of the late 1930s, possessing noble lineage was often tantamount to a death sentence or a guaranteed ticket to the Gulag. Consequently, surviving aristocrats like Princess Natalia Iskander, Natalia Androsova, survived only by adopting complete social mimicry, changing surnames, falsifying civil records, destroying family heirlooms, and fabricating proletarian origins. Secret police registries maintained by the NKVD actively tracked families with czarist ties, meaning that any slip in cover, a slip of the tongue, a retained aristocratic accent, or contact with foreign relatives, could trigger immediate arrest under Article 58 for anti-Soviet agitation. The state's treatment of these hidden descendants was heavily tied to social and economic marginalization through institutional discrimination. Former nobles and their children faced severe restrictions regarding university admissions, employment in state industries, and residence permits, propiska, in major urban centers like Moscow and Leningrad. By barring aristocratic families from higher education and white-collar state positions, the Soviet regime sought to systematically erase their social capital, forcing them into manual labor, technical trades, or low-visibility public services where their backgrounds were less likely to draw scrutiny. Interestingly, the relationship between the Soviet regime and hidden aristocrats evolved into a bizarre pragmatism during national crises like World War II, the Great Patriotic War. The Soviet state temporarily relaxed its ideological witch hunts to mobilize the entire population against the Nazi invasion. During this period, descendants of noble houses served in the Red Army, worked in defense logistics, or acted as emergency transport drivers, proving their loyalty to the homeland regardless of the political regime. For many, military service served as a crucial shield, allowing them to earn Soviet medals that helped legitimize their post-war existence in the eyes of local party officials. With the advent of the post-Stalin thaw under Nikita Khrushchev and the subsequent Brezhnev era, the active terror against former elites subsided into passive surveillance by the KGB. While mass executions and labor camp deportations ceased to be the primary tool of control, state security agencies continued to monitor known or suspected noble descendants. The Cold War environment created constant fear that Western intelligence agencies might attempt to contact remaining aristocrats inside the USSR to build underground resistance networks or gather intelligence, making any foreign correspondence dangerous for those living inside Soviet borders. Simultaneously, a fascinating cultural paradox emerged within Soviet society during the late Cold War. While official state propaganda continued to denounce the Tsarist regime as corrupt and tyrannical, Soviet citizens, intellectuals, and artists increasingly developed an underground fascination with pre-revolutionary history and the lost culture of the nobility. Hidden descendants who managed to discreetly navigate Soviet life often found quiet respect among writers, actors, and dissidents who viewed them as living links to a rich, un-Sovietized Russian cultural past. Ultimately, the Soviet perception of hidden aristocratic descendants reflected a broader ideological dilemma: the total erasure of a class versus the reality of its enduring human presence. For nearly 8 decades, these individuals lived double lives, functioning as loyal Soviet workers by day, while silently holding the memory of their ancestral heritage by night. Their survival through the Cold War demonstrates how human adaptability, strategic secrecy, and patriotic service allowed a targeted social group to endure under one of the most pervasive surveillance states in modern history. For centuries, a historical name was synonymous with automatic authority, unearned wealth, and institutional dominance. Dynastic lineage guaranteed a seat at the table regardless of individual competence. However, the rise of modern meritocratic structures in the 20th and 21st centuries fundamentally disrupted this dynamic. In an era driven by professional qualifications, technical skills, and measurable performance, inherited titles and historical legacy no longer act as standalone passes to power. Instead, birthright has been stripped of its absolute privilege, forcing historical identity to adapt to a global economy that rewards personal merit above all else. This economic shift transformed how historical legacy is valued in the public sphere. Where a royal or noble name once conferred divine authority, it now operates primarily as a form of social and cultural capital. In modern corporate and creative environments, a historic surname can open an initial door or generate immediate media attention, but it cannot sustain a career. An heir to an imperial dynasty working in corporate law, fine art, or software engineering faces the same market pressures, client expectations, and performance metrics as any peer. Historical legacy has effectively evolved from a legal right of governance into an ambassadorial tool, one that requires individual effort to validate. Moreover, the digital age has democratized access to information and flattened traditional social hierarchies. Audiences and consumers in the 21st century display an increasing skepticism toward inherited status, demanding authenticity and tangible contribution. When modern descendants engage in commercial ventures, fashion design, or historical preservation, their success relies on their ability to offer real expertise and value. A historical brand name only holds long-term credibility if the individual behind it demonstrates genuine skill, professional integrity, and a clear understanding of contemporary market needs. This meritocratic reality has also reshaped how fallen dynasties manage their historical memory. Rather than dwelling on lost thrones or obsolete political claims, forward-thinking heirs focus on historical stewardship and public education. By establishing nonprofit foundations, curating museum archives, and funding cultural restoration, they leverage their unique historical connection to serve the public good. In doing so, they convert what could be a static, nostalgic legacy into an active, positive force within modern civil society, earning respect through philanthropic impact rather than demanding deference by birthright. The intersection of meritocracy and historical legacy also presents a compelling psychological transition for descendants themselves. Free from the rigid expectations and political isolation of historic royal courts, modern heirs have the autonomy to choose their own professions and define their own identities. Whether working behind a camera, managing corporate risk, or painting landscapes in a studio, their professional achievements belong to them as individuals, not merely as custodians of an ancestral tree. This shift bridges the gap between historical heritage and individual agency, allowing history to inform identity without dictating fate. Furthermore, this cultural transformation offers a valuable lesson about the durability of human legacy. Physical empires crumble, state treasuries vanish in political crises, and constitutional privileges are rewritten by revolutions. Yet, the intangible assets of heritage, cultural knowledge, historical storytelling, and artistic tradition endure when they are thoughtfully adapted to new eras. The modern survival of historical dynasties proves that legacy is not a fixed asset to be passively inherited. It is a dynamic narrative that must be continually earned, reinterpreted, and built upon by each successive generation. Ultimately, the era of professional merit has not destroyed historical legacy. It has refined it. By replacing feudal birthright with individual accountability, the modern world has challenged the descendants of history's greatest empires to prove their worth on equal footing with the rest of society. The true measure of a historic name today lies not in the crowns of the past, but in the meaningful contributions its bearers make to the world present. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, geopolitics, and how the past shapes our modern world, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a like to support our independent research.